If you care about public education, you won't want to miss this week's episode of The Blue-Headed Stepchild. Today, I talked with Felicia Martin, who is the executive director and president of the Texas Freedom Network. We talked about anything from school vouchers to funding public education, all the way to the 10 Commandments and the separation of church and state. Check it out. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Today, I'm here with Felicia Martin. She is the president and executive director of Texas Freedom Network. Felicia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your organization. Who are you guys? How long have you been around? What do you do?
Thank you for asking first. Thanks for having me. Texas Freedom Network is a nonprofit, nonpartisan grassroots organization that was originally founded to combat and be a far-right watchdog. We've been in existence for 30 years. We were founded by the great Cecile Richards, who's the daughter of the last Democratic governor of Texas, Anne. So if you're from the Austin area, you are familiar with Anne and Cecile and what Cecile went on to do. But since her departure, we have evolved and we continue to be a force for protecting and defending public education, religious freedom, and civil liberties for Texans.
Awesome. I think it's an interesting, I don't know if you've thought about this or if it was thoughtful, the name of the organization, the Texas Freedom Network, in that it very much kind of has that feel as like it would be a far-right, religious organization, but it's not.
It's not, and it's often mistaken for that. I actually was testifying this past week when someone was asking, the Texas Freedom Network, and the person continued to tell me all of his conservative religious beliefs because I think he assumed that we were a conservative organization until we sat next to each other in the hearing and testified. And I don't think it was until I started speaking that he realized that we were not what he thought we were. But I think it's a really great play on the idea that we have to reclaim the narrative. I think Cecile was intentional about that. I think even at that time, 30 years ago, right Christian nationalists were trying to claim words like freedom and democracy. And so I think it was intentional on her part. And we continue to use that name. And now we're going to have to reclaim freedom again.
Absolutely. I love it. Okay, so I know there's a lot happening right now, and, as we speak, Democrats are holed up in various parts around the country, have fled the state house in order to prevent a vote on redistricting. But I would like to focus on education, because I think I was reading a Texas Tribune article, and it said this legislative session was pretty much defined by education. A lot happened, but there's so many different education bills. And so let's start there, yeah?
Let's do it.
Okay. So my first question is going to be that Texas lawmakers just passed an $8.5 billion boost to school funding, ranging from pay bumps for teachers and support staff to changes in special ed and school safety. Do you think that this is a sufficient investment, and are the parameters on how this is to be used the right ones?
Right. It's tricky. $8.5 billion sounds like a major investment. But in any new funding for public schools are welcome. Like we all want that. I think it's interesting that they don't explain kind of where that money is going to go and how it compares to investments across the country. So if you think about $8.5 billion over the course of a couple of years, it basically breaks down to $1,700 per student over a couple of years. And even with that, Texas would still fall $4,000 below the national average in cost per student expenditures, which would rank us 47th still in the nation. So I think conservatives that talk about this as something like, look at us, we're investing $8.5 billion. They don't explain that it doesn't really catch us up to consistent insufficient funding for public schools.
I think it's tricky nowadays where we're throwing around these numbers.
Yep.
And it's just so hard to get perspective on whether or not this is a substantial investment or if it's not, right?
And it isn't. And I think that if you listen to the debates on the floor and you listen to some of the Democrats push back on this, it's for that reason. It's like we are basically trying to catch up on chronic disinvestment in public education.
And, we're going to talk more about vouchers here in a moment, but was this done in earnest, or was this done as a sort of, hey, we're going to pass school vouchers, so here's a little bit of investment in public schools? I don't want to be, have the kind of pessimistic, output and thought about that, but is that the case?
It is. It's the latter.
Well,
it's it's a Band-Aid on a gaping wound when it comes to public education. And so they really wanted that $1 billion for the educational savings accounts and for vouchers. And so then they say, well, we're going to go ahead and invest all of this money, not telling the public that we are so far behind that this is just a dent and what we need to be doing to invest in our public system. So yeah, it was misleading. And it's not coming from a place of true investment in our public system in a way that's coming from an earnest place at all. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I read that, I believe with the school vouchers that they're limited to spending maybe $1 billion the first couple of years.
Right.
But then that cap disappears, and some of the budget offices have predicted that by 2030, we could be spending $5 billion a year on the school voucher program, which, if that is the case, then that puts this in perspective. Okay, $5 billion a year on school vouchers, but we've got a one-time, who knows until the next investment of 8.5, right?
That's correct. I mean, you've done your homework, so you can tell that the math doesn't math, and that, we've seen this in other states where vouchers were implemented, like in Arizona, where initial estimates for 68 million, it blew up to 668 million over the course of a couple of years. And so, yeah, estimates now say that 5 to 7 billion over a few years. We don't really know because you have to wait and see how they play out. But in Arizona, it's $300,000 per school per year. That's every dollar that goes to librarians, transportation, special education support. So the breakdown there, they throw a big number, but they don't really give you any context to what that could look like over time. And it's all taxpayer dollars.
Right. And, in Texas, that taxpayer dollar often comes from property taxes, right? Like a big way that we fund schools in Texas is through property taxes. Right. And so at the same time, they're doing things like increasing the homestead exemption, which is supposed to provide property tax relief. But at the same time, we're creating a shortfall for funding public schools, which when they come to balance things in the end is going to mean for an increase in property tax rates, right?
That's right. And I think people can, they're ideating about how they can pass these sorts of bills without having to get into the conversations around property tax and what that means. And I think if more people were aware of that implication, that there would be more people testifying, that there would be more of an uproar. But they passed this voucher scheme has been denied for decades. Right. So this is all political. This is all driven by billionaire interests because all of this is seen as a business. Right. And I think where the public and the taxpayer kind of, get left behind is not knowing how this is going to impact their own taxes, what they're investing in the public system.
Right. And okay, so let's talk about vouchers then. And you gave me a good segue to my next question about it being a billionaire scheme, right? And so explain this to me a little bit in that big donors have been pushing this for years and years and years. And like you said, in the past, it keeps failing because there was a minority of rural Republicans that also sided with Democrats in shutting this down, right?
Right.
And then they got primaried against, right? And a lot of them got kicked out. And then there's just been more pressure put on people. There's a new Speaker of the House, right? What is the goal here? Is it so let's take Governor Abbott, right? Is it, hey, I push this through, and then these people contribute more money to my campaign and political ambitions? Or is it that Abbott actually has an interest in promoting a more neo-Christian state and merging that with the education system? Sorry if that's not a very articulate question.
No, it's a great question. It's informed by, politic and economy and self-interest. And they're both right? Abbott has had this fight in front of him before and he's lost. And he hadn't put all his eggs in that basket for years because he knew he had rural constituents who did not agree with this voucher scheme. And so let it go. Why was he so adamant about this being the issue this year? Because he is wanting to continue to be the governor of Texas, and he has other interests too, right? He's tried to put himself on a national platform, and so this is for his own gain and to put money in the coffers for his own political pursuits. The same is true for those that he had primaried out. He invested, and these billionaires that invested in him also invested in those candidates that he needed to flip to be in those seats. So now they're tied. They're all tied to those interests. So rumor had it that there were calls that went on the night before to some of those that were still on the fence around vouchers to say, remember who you owe this to. And so I think that even though constituents in those legislators' areas disagreed with it, and even though people like Representative James Tallarico, who said, let's take it to a vote, they didn't want to do that because the people, I think, would tell the governor that this is not what they want. He rammed it through, and it's for both. It's because I think that he really does want to push white Christian nationalist thinking into the public sphere. And he also wants to make MAGA and the billionaires who invested in his campaign happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess it's not an either or question, right? Both things are true. Yeah,
Yep.
I don't know. I'm not sure why frame it that way. Okay, another criticism of the school voucher program is that up to 20% of the program's initial $1 billion budget could flow to wealthier families who earn roughly $160,000 or more a year.
Yeah.
It's been said that this is in some ways just another tax break or another break for the wealthy. Do you think this is accurate? And why wasn't there a cap put on family earning in order to make sure that the money went to those who were in need?
Because that wasn't the purpose. The purpose was to incentivize privatizing education. So we'll just be really clear. This was a reverse Robin Hood scheme that takes away from public schools to help rich, wealthy families continue to send their children to public schools. That's why there is no cap. That's why anyone is eligible. And they say, well, we're going to prioritize, low-income students and those that have special needs. Just because you prioritize them doesn't mean that they're going to be admitted
And what
into
does that
these
mean
schools.
to prioritize them?
Yeah, what does that mean? 20% of them are going to be set aside for students who are higher need. Well, they're not the ones applying for the vouchers. It's going to be wealthier families who have 2-3 kids in school. It's a $10,000 voucher. So $10,000 off of a $20,000 education is a great benefit for them. But for a lower income student who may want to apply to one of these, private institutions, $10,000 doesn't close the gap.
Right, still unattainable.
It's still unattainable. So vouchers don't create equity. It actually creates more segregation and more inequality. And that's exactly what they want. When you talk about, privatizing education, that inevitably leads to segregation, and they want their children to have a certain type of education away from certain types of students. And it has kind of been something that they've passed underneath the table before. Now it's just out in the open. They just get to be sort of racist in public, and nobody's there to hold them accountable. So the way that they're passing this stuff through is, through a House and a Senate. It's all majority, and they've been voting along majority lines.
Right. Yeah, and I've even read, too, that in the loose wording that's in there and how this money is spent, that it can be used, so if you're, homeschooled or things like that it could be used for transportation or laptops and things like this. And so all of a sudden, we're taking money out of public schools and we're subsidizing wealthier people being able to, pay for Ubers and laptops.
With zero accountability, and what the public system is supposed to promise. The Texas Constitution says that all of our young people are entitled to a public school that also provides transportation, that provides mental health and well-being services. There are accountability metrics that our public schools are held to. Private education is not.
See, I don't understand that. Why not? If it's going to be public dollars, why are they not held to the same standards as public schools?
It's a great question. And you heard many people in the public and legislators ask that same question. And you would hear the responses, them skirting around the issue that, well, there's a reason that, they're private. They don't have to fall under the same standards. We want them to have this discretion in how they allocate dollars. But it really is because they don't want to have to promise those resources if they don't have to provide them. Mm-hmm. And they can really cut it off at the admissions level. They don't have to think about those things if they're not compelled to admit students. Public schools are compelled to admit any student.
Right.
And that's the challenge, I think, that people don't understand, that this savings account can be used for anything without any oversight by any entity or anybody, and that's a challenge. I mean, it's inequitable.
Right. Are there any type of standards or regulations around private school admissions? Like when you apply to a private school, like I guess it's a big range of private schools, right? But do they base it off of scores or anything like that?
It could be anything.
Yeah.
And there are schools that will not admit you if you are LGBTQ, if you don't espouse the same belief system. So these are not everyone gets in no matter what. And again, even if they prioritize a certain percentage of these vouchers for those with special learning needs or lower income students, that doesn't necessarily mean that those students will be admitted. So it is a choice type of legislation, but it gives private schools the choice as to whether or not they're going to admit students, not giving more students opportunity to access education.
Right. Okay. Well, playing devil's advocate here, voucher supporters argue that such programs would push public schools to compete for students and perform better academically. Do you put any stock in this argument?
No. I mean, I think that argument has failed in practice and in principle because public schools aren't businesses. They're a public good, right? In the sense that we shouldn't have to be competing to serve students with disabilities or with special needs or anything of that nature. Like, real improvement comes from investment and accountability. And I think that starving schools who are already under-resourced doesn't position them well to support students in their needs. So that argument comes back, well, the public schools are not doing enough. Why aren't they doing enough? Right? Like, we have teacher shortages, we have teacher burnout, we're dealing with dilapidated buildings and systems, and that all comes from a lack of investment and a lack of valuing the system. So I don't think that that's a fair argument, and we shouldn't be pitting public schools against each other, or saying that this should be some sort of incentive for public schools to get better if we have competitors.
Right. And I think something too that gets lost is that education is not just education, right? It's like helping raise a next generation. And when you talk about how broad the systems are and what they provide, right, from food and nutrition to mental health support and transportation and childcare and just all the socialization, right? It's like, it's so much broader and should be valued so much more as a keystone in what will set the next generation up for success. They're not going there just to learn math and just to learn how to read, right?
This is schools have for centuries been the central location for communities to come together to celebrate during disasters. Where do people assemble? They assemble at schools because they are supposed to be safe spaces that belong to everyone. And I think that, we have these debates around funding, but again, when you get into the details of it, a lot of that funding, that $8.5 billion, is earmarked for security, for testing, for these things that are not holistic in the way that you've described. They actually take away dollars from things like the arts, mental health, and well-being. So all of those things that help create well-rounded, cared-for young people are taken away in favor of testing and security and safety and all of these things. And so the money even that's allocated isn't at the discretion of the buildings to use as they see fit. They have to use it in the way that it was given to them. And that too makes it much more difficult for schools to meet the holistic needs of young people.
Right. And each school is going to be different, right? And not every school is going to need investments in security. Well, maybe there are some, right, that are the buildings way outdated, others that have robust teacher support, and then others that are in desperate need for it and instead have the money earmarked otherwise, right?
Correct. So I think that, again, a lot of administrators have had their hands tied for the last 10 years. They will be in an even more difficult situation this year as they see their budgets decreased because of the voucher system that's going to be implemented in September.
Right. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about religion.
Let's do it.
Because we're talking about education.
Yep.
So a bill that would mandate the 10 Commandments in classrooms is part of a larger effort to inject religion into public schools. What are the constitutional and social implications of this? And where do you see the line between religious freedom and religious imposition? And I think that your organization specifically is in a unique position to answer this, as it being one of your core tenets, in that you look at religious freedoms in addition to education, and it just happens to be that they're very much being blended right now.
And they have been in Texas for a while, and I think that our founder Cecile saw that when she went to the State Board of Education and saw the business, the politic, and religion all being intersecting in these really unique ways. The South, I think, in general is that way, but Texas, we like to be the poster child for all things interrelated between religion and public spaces, which, there's this, we say, well, isn't there a separation of church and state? Sort of, that's part of our Constitution. And you have actual real legislators saying that's a myth. It's like, actually, that's not a myth. That's one of the sort of the foundational principles of the founding of our country. But it's up for debate, apparently. And I think if you think about the real implications of 10 Commandments that are part of, even if you don't know very much about religion, you know that it's a tenet of one religion, Christianity, being placed in the public space of a school, has to be in the classroom in front. Can't be in a corner somewhere. It has to be right there.
I was going to ask that.
Has to be a certain size where, imagine a Muslim or Jewish or atheist, not in some students of no religious background, having to see that every day, right? Or a teacher feeling like they have to explain it in some way. That's not religious freedom. That's religious coercion.
Imposition, right?
Imposition. It is promoting one religion over another, which in and of itself is contrary to, again, the foundation of our country, pluralism. And it puts it in the public space, in our education system, in a way that doesn't allow our young people to think about or have the option to think about anything outside of that. So yeah, and it's not just in our school buildings, right? We're seeing white Christian nationalism play out in multiple arenas in our country. Texas is a great example of where that's taking place. The book bans, DEI legislation, whitewashing of history. So the public sphere, public education is one place, but it is part of this much broader effort that we're seeing throughout our country to push Christian nationalism onto people. And it is against many of our foundational principles, and you are seeing litigation come out against it because it obviously, if you look at it from the outside, it is a violation of people's rights. But I think it's just something that we have to keep an eye on because it has such further implications outside of public schools. It is coming into our public societal sort of everyday life language in a way that's very concerning.
Right. And I think you've said the phrase a couple of times, this white Christian nationalism, and it's important to distinguish that between traditional Christian values in their truest sense.
That's right.
Right. And, the Ten Commandments, for example, right? I was trying to think of some examples, but the Ten Commandments, right?
Yeah.
And that's not what they're trying to promote. They're trying to promote this idea that being an American, or in some ways, or a Texan, in this, when we say nationalism, we can talk about being a Texan too, right?
Yes.
Means also tying that into being a Christian, and this sense of patriotism, and that if you are going to embody being a good American, that means that you also incorporate being a Christian, regardless of the teachings and the morality that you hold, right?
Correct. I mean, it's brilliant if you think about it. And one of the reasons why, Texas Freedom Network in our next 30 years, we have to reclaim the narrative of what it means to be Christian, what it means to be patriotic, what is democracy, right? And I think you see the vulnerable place that people who do use faith as a way to make decisions in places like the Valley. Paula Ramos speaks about it in some of her books, and she's a journalist, and saying Latin culture, people from Mexico and from Latin America value faith. They use that to make their decisions, and they want to be patriotic American citizens. And so if that means subscribing to this sort of assimilation, white Christian nationalism, they will fall into that because they want to be an American.
And it's a reason, like in a lot of the counties along the border, turned a little redder this time, right? Right. Yeah.
And I think hopefully, what those communities are starting to see is that they were sold a lie, right? That this narrative that was placed in front of them was to trick them into believing that that side had their best interest at heart. Now that they're seeing their federal benefits being taken, their communities being ravaged by ICE raids, their public schools being de-invested in, I think we hope to start to see that they question, at least, even if they don't know who and which way they're going to vote, that they start to ask good questions. And I think we play a role in that, like Texas Freedom Network and our young people down there. It's to start talking to communities about how are your values being represented in this current administration?
Yeah.
Do you believe that they have your best interests at heart? And I think that, that's what people empowered do. They prey on vulnerability.
Right. And I think it's one of the biggest, I want to call it cognitive dissonance, but, poor people voting Republican. I don't know how to try to say this more softly, but like they're doing the least for you. They don't have your back, and they're playing the culture wars and preying on your beliefs and your religion, while simultaneously divesting in your communities and taking healthcare from the most vulnerable people. And so, but they play up, the invasions, the more sensitive social issues, right? In order to garner the vote.
Well, what the right seized on in this last election cycle was fear, right? If you think about years ago when we had Obama coming in, it was hope, right? It was connection, hope. This time around, we're seeing them seize on fear. They're coming to get whoever they are, they're coming to get your jobs. They are going to hurt your family, right? And so if you just think about that psychologically, all you want to do is distance yourselves from the they, right? Even if the they are people that look like you that they're talking about, or you yourself. It's like, I want to be an American, and I want to be part of this society. And so I think we're going to have to spend a lot of time reclaiming that narrative of saying, no, that is not democracy. That is not fair representation. They do not have your best interest at heart. And so we'll have to look at demographics in our population and figure out what message do we need to craft to help them not see it our way, but to ask good questions to decipher for themselves whether or not people are representing their interests.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Getting away from vouchers a little bit.
Yeah.
Although we could talk about them for a while.
All of it, yeah.
I think this is an interesting one in that a new law restricts cell phone use in schools. While some see this as a way to reduce distractions, are there any civil rights, equity, or safety concerns that TFN is watching here? And I'm not sure how I feel about this one.
Yeah, this I wouldn't say this is one of our priority areas. I think obviously our peers in the ACLU probably have a lot of perspectives on this around infringement on civil liberties. But I think that all of us can kind of get on the same page of, let's try to limit distractions in the classroom, but who does this disproportionately impact, right? And I think if you think about our schools, like cell phones have become this sort of connection to the outside world in instances where you're in fear or where there's danger or where if you have a medical issue that you feel like maybe your teacher's not going to understand, but you know that you can contact your parent. So I think it just comes down to, how is this going to be enforced? What is this really about? I feel like a lot of the legislation that has passed recently has not been thought through, like the execution of said policy. It's like, we're going to tell you that this isn't allowed, but is a teacher going to be hunting down kids to steal their phones? Like,
I think I've seen, I don't know if it's in Texas, this country, another country, but somewhere, I don't know if you've ever been to like a comedy show and they put your phone in like a little pouch, right? And so you still have it, but you don't have like the means to open it. And I want to say some school has been doing that. And see, well, I do agree that they are your connection to the outside world in circumstances of medical needs and, big safety alerts and that kind of stuff. They're also like a disease, they are terrible in some ways. And it's, I don't know. I do think it's a good idea. Like in some ways, if it can be thoughtful and if you can put some clear guardrails around it, and if those guardrails are then reevaluated and adjusted and that sort of thing, I do think it's a good idea.
Yeah, that's not one that I think that me or anyone from my organization would fall on the sword for. I do think that it's good to be intentional about any policy that you put into place to see who it's going to put the most sort of responsibility on to carry out. And in this case, it's teachers who are already overwhelmed, burnt out. I can see them saying, I don't get paid enough for this, But I agree. Like if these are things that could be well thought out and help teachers, again, I'm always on the side of teachers. If it can help teachers connect with their students better, have less distractions, I'm all for it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like I feel like I've never talked to a teacher, well, other than the handful of times, but you hear a bunch of young people too. They're like, "Oh, my second year of teaching, my third year of teaching."
Yeah.
It's like when was the last time you talked to somebody that's in their 7th year of teaching? It's either lifers,
Yes,
right? And it's like,
yes.
I'm on my 30th year, or
Yes.
somebody that burns out after 2 or 3 years, right?
Yes, and you haven't asked this question yet, but I will try to tie it back to this implementation of 10 Commandments and all of these things that are coming up that are new legislation that are going to be rolled out this school year. Just did a presentation to a group of teachers, new teachers, 500 across the state, many of whom are coming into the state from other places to fill these teacher shortages. And so for them to hear some of the new policies that are going to go into laws that are going to go into effect, they're perplexed, terrified. Like, what is happening? Like literally, what in the hell did I get myself into coming
Bad
down
for
here?
staffing and retention and recruitment.
Yes, and they're asking all of the questions that you're asking. Like, isn't that against the Constitution? You mean I can't call someone by their chosen name? Like, I have to not out that, like, bathroom bill. There's another one. Like, there's all this legislation coming through that, again, put teachers and adults in these young people's lives in this very interesting situation where what are they at liberty to say or not say? Will they be arrested if they don't put the 10 Commandments up in their, like, there are these real questions where we have to say to them, we don't know, because it hasn't really been thought through. This was done from a place of wanting to impose ideology, beliefs. They haven't thought through how to, enforce it. But it's those things that we have, that the bigger implications of it, that, will we be able to retain teachers or recruit talent, not just in PK through 12, but in our university systems, right? These laws have implications in the way, in our overall quality of life. For the people who live here and who have lived here for generations, like my family, to the people that we want to come here because they're smart and they have gifts and we want them to contribute to our society. Will we get them anymore because of this craziness? I think that's where we feel very sad about what's happening.
It's very short-sighted, right? It's not thinking about how this is going to affect generations to come and even in our lifetimes, right?
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I got one more question on education for you.
Yep.
There was momentum to reform or reduce the impact of the STAR testing, but it collapsed late in session. I did see that, I think either this morning or yesterday, that there were advances in the special session with ideas to replace the STAR testing. What's the harm in sticking with high-stakes testing? And I don't know. Give me your thoughts on this, because I always think that, there's got to be some kind of metrics to judge student and school and teacher success. Obviously, we don't want to tie it to one thing, but if we replace this, what are the implications?
Well, I think big picture, high stakes testing distorts learning. Hands down. I think classrooms turn into test prep factories. There's big business around testing as well. Same with curriculum. So you're going to see big business dictate what they believe schools should be held accountable to, as opposed to teachers, educators, people who have a better sense of how to evaluate students on a scale that allows for differences in need, access, language, the things that you would want to have considered when you're evaluating a student's progression and whether or not they're meeting certain standards. So
who would, like, for example, with the STAR testing, who would be like the business side behind that would be pushing to keep the STAR exam?
It would be the state. It would be, I don't know the business names of the people who make the test, but it's the people who make the questions, the people who make the actual test itself,
right?
The online,
like a Pearson VUE,
right?
Like
the technology companies that support that, they all get paid a significant amount of money, and so they have a vested interest in keeping that. I think because it's such a big business, and a lot of our legislators are paid by these big businesses. I think that
they all are.
They all are, right? They're getting they're getting incentives to push these tests, and it gives them an out too, right? Like they don't have to worry about investing in public schools if they can prove that kids aren't up to par, right? They're not passing the STAR test. Our public schools are so terrible.
Right. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
Schools are so terrible. We can't do anything. And look, they're not even passing standardized tests. It's like, that's another way for them to skirt responsibility, to say, actually, if we invest in teacher training, if we invest in helping young people to meet their basic needs, let's just talk about give them food and a place to be, that any young person can probably meet the standard. Right? But if you take these things away and you focus on whether or not they pass a STAR test or whatever kind of standardized test it is, then you really are able to say, that school gets an F.
Right.
Right. And so I think
there's too many variables. You're not isolating anything. You're not really testing anything when there's so much going on in the background. Right?
And what are those tests meant to do? Is it meant to penalize a school, an entire entity, or is the purpose to help young people figure out where they are so they can be competent and proficient in these types of our curriculum? I think there's lots of questions around what's the purpose and who's creating this, right? And I think rarely do you find any standardized test that has actual teachers and educators helping to figure out how to make this fair and equitable.
Yeah.
And so it's business, and I think that there's been enough pressure now to consider an alternative. What that alternative will be, we'll see. But I think Republicans are much more willing now to come into this land because they got what they want. They got what they want with the vouchers, so they can concede a bit to say, oh yeah, we should definitely think about that STAR test. It's like, because we got what we wanted in another place. It's tricky the way that they politicize these things and what they'll fall back on when they get what they want.
Yeah. No, it's a brutal reality, right? It's a brutal reality.
It is.
Okay. All right. Well, I've got one last question for you.
Okay.
And redistricting, just because it's so prevalent and it's so important, right? And so just to kind of quickly summarize that, every 10 years, typically based on census data, a state would redraw the districts. And from pressure from the president, Greg Abbott has now brought that to the forefront and is trying to do it halfway through the decade.
Right.
And very openly and blatantly based on the idea that, hey, we could change this map, pick up 5 seats, and Republicans could keep control of the House for the primary, right?
Right.
Like very openly just saying that, right? I don't even know what my question is.
I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
It is. I mean, I think it was very much like that. I think, it got shoved in because of a mandate from the Department of Justice and Trump basically saying, this is what I want. And Abbott and his friends coming together and saying, well, let's give him what he wants. There was no thought put into it. If you listen to testimony, you heard the person who proposed the bill, Representative Hunter, say, I'm not really sure how they came up with the maps. It was a lawyer and some experts, couldn't name the people who drew the map. So there was no thought put into this whatsoever. It is very blatantly racist. If you look at the districts that they carved up, it is predominantly Black and brown communities. They did it in a way where they were able to sort of find areas where there is less voter turnout so that they could, really just make it what they wanted it to be.
I almost feel like in this circumstance, yes, they are disenfranchising communities of color. But I feel like that's just almost an afterthought. And they're just, if it would have been rural communities that they had to disenfranchise to cut this up in order to get the extra 5 seats, then that's what they would have done.
It. They would have done it. And, it's not, it's not coincidence. We don't believe in coincidences here, that it's districts represented by very high profile vocal leaders of communities of color. Jasmine Crockett, Al Green, the 18th district has historically been represented, Barbara Jordan, Sheila Jackson Lee, Sylvester, Mickey Leland. These are names, if you grew up in Texas in the 18th district, they're heroes. They're people who those communities finally felt like they had a voice and they were able to vote for someone to represent their interests and their voice. The way these districts are, I mean, it's almost like they just closed their eyes and just started drawing lines on the map, because now the 18th district extends into like Brazoria County and Fort Bend. It's like, that's white people. That's not even the 18th district, right? Like, that's not. So I think it was just, it has been so blatantly a racist gerrymandering approach that I don't want to go so far, and I kind of will say that they're doing us a favor in a lot of ways in the progressive movement by it's just they put it all out there.
Yeah, there's no like narrative behind it anymore. It's
no
like,
shame in our game.
Hey, we need 5 more seats.
We're going to get
go
5
change
more
the maps,
seats. It's racist. It's racist. We admit that, and we're just going to take what we want because we can.
And some of the biggest protections against gerrymandering, I think, were like based in like racial issues, right? But with the courts having this tilt to them now, like I do worry that it might take too long, right? And so I don't know the logistics behind. I've heard that the FBI is now going to assist in bringing back
on the game.
bringing back the Democrats to Texas, or how long they hold out, or if this does go through. But if it does, then it's not unheard of that we've had extreme gerrymandering before, but in the past, there's been protections in place to say that if the gerrymandering was done to disenfranchise people on the basis of race and religion and these sorts of things, then the courts have stepped in to be able to force states to redraw them. One, I worry about time in that kind of lengthy court battle. And then 2, courts just saying, that was a precedent, but we don't do that anymore.
I mean, we're looking at all our branches of government to try to be a check and balance system, because that's the way we were created, right? We learned about the executive, all the branches of government trying to be check and balances. But when they're all run by corrupt, right-leaning people, you start to worry. And so I think that then puts the onus on us in the progressive movement to think of different strategies. So we have to play out the tape, right? We have to roll it out. Okay, so they get the 5 districts. Then what do we do? In Texas, we go into those districts and we start working.
Right.
We start educating people about what the issues are. We register people to vote, and we get them out to vote.
Right.
So there's that work in Texas.
I did see that on I think it was a Texas Tribune article. It was like the 5 seats even with the new maps, the 5 seats may not be as easy as as Republicans are thinking.
That's right. We don't concede, right? We keep moving, and then we look at our peers in this space. You see the Democrats out there breaking quorum. They're in New York, they're in Chicago, they're in Boston, and they're getting a lot of attention. They are right now the symbols of democracy. Hell yeah. Like if that's going to, sort of fuel the movement, great. If California needs to redistrict to get us 10 seats, do it. If New York needs it, if we're playing that kind of game, we have to reimagine and re-strategize and play their game.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where, as I think people in our movement are like, we're gonna be fair, and it's like we're playing a rigged game. So if we're gonna have to work in those circumstances, then we need to be ruthless.
Yep.
We need to be like Gene Wu said, come and take it.
And it's been a criticism of the Democratic Party for a while now, is that we're playing nice and they're not, right?
That's right.
We're going high and they're going low, right?
That's right.
And that sort of stuff. So I agree. Awesome. Well, Felicia, I'm very appreciative of your time, infinitely knowledgeable, and I know you're hard at work, and so thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely.